All right, by the end of this week, I'm going to have gone over chapters 10, 11, and 12. I have done outside lectures on 13 through whatever it is, 18 or whatever. I will put those out on the system. All right. In addition, what I'm going to do, what I've started doing, is rather than going over the test as a class, okay, what I'm going to do is I've been taping outside of class. So I've got 3 lectures done already, and I will send you the URLs to those. You will get the test back tomorrow. I wanted to wait until everyone had finished taking it before I graded them. So you will get them back first thing tomorrow. Now, my suggestion, you can do this any way you want to do it. But my suggestion is it appears as though people get a little flustered when you have to take more than one of the hands-on tests per day. So we've got 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12. That's 5 more tests. I'm going to suggest we take 8 tomorrow, 9 Thursday, 10 Friday, 11 Monday, 12 Tuesday. Okay? I just think it'll work out better for everybody if you only have one test that you have to worry about. That's the only thing. Next week is going to be lab for the entire week, except for those 2 tests. So other than that half an hour, that is what? Just about 20 hours. What does that mean? You're going to learn that in just a couple minutes, okay? Before we do that, let's take a look at Chapter 10. Now, Chapter 10 is on using jQuery to validate forms. It's a well-written chapter. It's a short chapter. If we go through it and you don't like the way that forms are validated using straight jQuery, and I'm going to show you this again later, but just so you see it, JavaScript also has another way that you can validate forms, and that is with what's called the jQuery validation plugin. All right? When you do your last test, we'll talk about that in a little bit. All right? When you do your last test, all right, you will have to go back and go back to your form for the gym, and you will have to revalidate it using regular jQuery as is shown in this chapter, or using the jQuery validation plugin or a different plugin. All right, we'll talk about all that stuff as we go on in just a few minutes. My hope is I'm going to get done with the lecture. It's only about a 12-page long chapter, 14-page long. It won't take long. So I want to get done with the chapter. I want to do the test review. You all had a piece of paper by your desk today. That's the test review for Chapter 10. We're going to go over it after we get done with the chapter. Then I'm going to talk about your last test. Your last test is basically to refine your website, the gym website, using jQuery instead of JavaScript. You will have a lot of time between this week and next week to work on it. In addition, starting today I'm going to go over the homework for Chapter 8. Tomorrow, Wednesday, I'm going to do 9 and 10. Thursday, I'm going to do 11. Friday, I'm going to do 12. You still have to turn it in. It's all due by Friday, all right, of next week. I want that last week you to be able to concentrate on creating your electronic portfolio. Some of you have gotten behind on your homework. You know who you are. Not looking at anybody. I'm not mentioning this to anybody specifically because it's more than one person. If you decide you want to go back and redo some of that homework, if you never did it, I will give you up to 50% credit. But as an example, let's just assume for lack of argument that you have 10 homework assignments you didn't do, okay? And they're worth 100 points each. That's 1,000 points you're missing. So let's say you do half of them, all right? Or let's say you do them all, and I give you 50% on each. Now that's 500 points you're adding instead of adding 0. If you say, well, I don't have the time, I don't care. I don't want to hear anymore. I don't have the time to do this. It's going to be interesting for those of you who say that or feel that when you get out on the job, if that becomes your excuse, your ass is going to be out on the street very quickly. All right? I know because I've worked with people like that. All right? I was at a job once, the first day I was there. They were escorting a person out. They had a box that he was able to put his stuff into. And they went through the box, and I said, "What's going on?" He said, "He just wasn't doing anything." And they kicked him out. They didn't even give him a warning. You know, he came in one morning, boom. They asked for his card, they took him out. All right, stuff happens. All right. So, Chapter 10, as the author says here, to create dynamic web pages, you use HTML to create forms to let the user enter data. You know what forms are. All right. So it says introduction to forms and controls. We shouldn't have to spend much time at all on the HTML5 controls for working with forms and the HTML5 and CSS3 features for data validation. We've done that already. So we'll concentrate most of our efforts on the last 8 or so pages of the chapter, which is how to use jQuery to work with forms. Now the chapter ends with, on the last 3 or 4 pages, a validation application that uses, all right, it's JavaScript and jQuery. All right. I would recommend that when you are doing your last assignment, that you go and have that stuff up. Use that as a guide as you're going. I told you how you can, if you want to, go out to the Muroc site and you can copy over all of their code, all of the book's code, if you want to do that. All right. So they show a simple form right here. I'm gonna say that looking at this, that should make sense to everyone in here. All right, I don't think we have to go over that. We don't have to go over IDs, etc. One thing I do want to mention, keep note of this, is that what we're going to end up doing, not now, but what we'll talk about as you go on in here, is the fact that when you do stuff like this, typically when you've got your form, you will have an action. And that action will, when you click the submit button, it will validate the form, and if the form validates, it will attempt to send it out to a file on a server someplace. That should make sense to you. I may or may not have said this to you, but you go through a series of validation steps on the client side using JavaScript. That said, it is totally possible and plausible that for whatever reason, that user can have turned off JavaScript on his or her machine. They can do that. All right? That's why that as soon as it goes over to this file, the first thing that typically happens, all the same validations that you just ran get run again on the server side. All right? Okay. The method here is get, which means all that information is going to be passed, and that information is going to be passed in what's called the query string. So that's the name of the file. What comes after the question mark is the query string. The name of the attribute, the name of the value that goes in the attribute. The name of the attribute, the name of the value that goes in the attribute. Again, that should make sense to you taking a look at it. We've talked about the fact in here. We've talked about action. We've talked about method. You'll notice if you look in here that this has ID and it has name. Almost always, the ID property is what's used on the client side. How? You know that. Get element by ID. You've done quite a bit of that. All right. The name property is normally what's going to end up being used on the server side. All right. So the ID is for the client, the name is for the server. Normally, that's how it works. So they talk about what a form is, what happens when you click the submit button, etc. I think we've gone over all this before. Again, data validation refers to the checking the data collected on the form to make sure it is valid, and complete data validation is always done on the server. Therefore, if any valid data is detected, the form is returned to the client. To save round trips, though, as I mentioned, it's typically done first on the client. All right? Enough of that sermon, because I can't say it any more than that. That's typically the way it's done, period. And it's been done like that for a long time. Then on 292 and really on 293, they talk about some of the common controls. Now, if you didn't do this on the first one, what I'm going to expect is on this second test, as an example, the email should be an email control. It shouldn't be text. It shouldn't be input type equal text. It should be input type equal email. All right, for that, I don't remember if there was a URL, but if that's it, the telephone, TEL, etc. Now, one thing about tel, just so you know, that is the one. It's gotten better over time, but out of all the ones that they show right there, the tel is the one that typically has the worst support. On some browsers, the telephone thing won't work. But the good news is if it can't understand tel, it just treats it like a text box. So it treats it as though it said input type equal text. All right? But you're to the point right now, you should be able to look at the stuff in here and say, oh, can I use any of this? For instance, if we decide in that gym that the people we're going to allow in are between 10 and 100. All right, we're not going to let in little kids, and once you're over 100, well, we probably shouldn't be in a gym anyway. All right, that kind of an idea. I'm just saying as an example, you could use a range control where you could set it up so that the minimum was 10 and the maximum was 100. All right. They show things in here, and there's good examples. All right. Should you use placeholders? Well, you should use placeholders on any field when there's a doubt as to what should be put in there. For instance, if you want to make sure the person puts in dashes in their social security number, you should probably use a placeholder to show them that. Same thing with zip code, that type of an idea. All right. But again, with an email, you get that built in. All right, it gives you a little bit of built-in validation with that. All right. The HTML5 and CSS features, again, we've looked at required. You know what that means. You may or may not have used this. Should you use this? Title. The text is displayed in a tooltip when the mouse hovers over a field. It's also displayed after the browser's default error message. Should you use that? Depends on the field. All right? You might say, well, I'm going to use that. That would be good for people who are maybe disabled. Well, people who are blind aren't going to be using a mouse anyway. All right? So it depends. All right? All right. Then they go again, why you need, two of the reasons why you need JavaScript for data validation. The HTML5 controls do a good job. They don't do a great job. There are still ways to get in through the back door, so to speak, with some of them. All right? And it's limited in the type of validation it can do. It says, for example, it can't check whether a field is equal to another one or look up the state in a table. All right? Well, you know how to use that drop down for states, and we don't have a password in our gym thing, but if we did, quite often you'll have a password and a confirm password, all right, to check for equality. You learn other ways of doing that, not next semester, but the following semester, all right? As it says, at the time of this writing, Chrome, IE, Edge, Firefox, and Opera, which are the major players, all support the HTML5 attributes and the CSS3 pseudo classes. All right. Even so, it says you typically need to use JavaScript and jQuery to do an adequate job of client-side validation. Now, earlier this last week, I guess at the end of last week, Evan also gave the St. Louis people the same test you took. Like me, he gave them 2 days to work on. Like me, the people weren't thrilled that, with the test, period. All right. What he did was he told the students, you can put any HTML5 validation in there you want, but I'm going to attempt to break your stuff. So if you want to make sure it works, use JavaScript for your validation. In other words, use them both, which is totally plausible, possible to do. All right. That brings us up to page 296. 8 pages left in the chapter. How to use jQuery to work with forms. As it says, jQuery provides selectors, methods and event methods designed to work with forms. However, it says, as the figure shows, jQuery doesn't provide specific features itself for data validation. All right? So if you look at the stuff that's here, I'm not going to read a lick of this. But if you look at the top of page 297, these are the things that you end up using with jQuery. Why is this important? All right. Well, notice colon. They all start with colon. Anything that starts with colon is actually referred to as a pseudo selector. Pseudo meaning false. All right. But you can see they have them for most everything that's in there. All right. Oops. And then down below that, the jQuery methods for getting and setting control values. You know that already because we looked at that in an earlier chapter. All right. The jQuery method for trimming an entry. I think I talked about this before. Very quickly, if somebody puts in blank, blank, hello, blank, 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 and you run the trim function on it, it removes these and it removes these, so there's just hello in there. And if you've never heard the story, I'm not the one making this up, but it used to be what people would do is they would fill out a form. They wouldn't fill out some fields. They'd press the submit button, all right? And it would come back and it would say, this field is required. So what they do to get around it before people started putting in validation, they just hit the space bar. All right, that's what the trim function does. It makes sure that if you tried to get around putting values into required fields by just hitting space, it removes those spaces. All right, that was really the advent why that basically happened. And there's not, just so you know, not that it matters, there's an R trim, which removes right spaces, and L trim, which removes left spaces, and trim, which calls L trim and R trim. All right, so it removes all of them. All right, as it says here, jQuery provides special selectors for selecting the controls on a form. All right, and including val and trim that we've already talked about. All right, event methods for forms. If you look here on page 299, these are all things that you have learned about previously, but you learned about them using JavaScript and not using jQuery. You should all know what the focus method is. Basically, whatever control has the focus is the one where you currently have your mouse. All right? You know what a blur event is. You know that if you move from one field to another, the first field blurs, the second field gets a focus. All right, we've talked about things like this already. All right. So these are the event methods, and these are methods for triggering those events. So as it says right here, if you look at the code examples, it says a handler that disables or enables radio buttons when a checkbox is checked or unchecked. For instance, maybe they've got some kind of a checkbox that says, are you a regular student or are you just like an auditing student, for example? And if you check auditing students, it's not going to ask you if you're a freshman, sophomore, junior, or senior type of thing, all right, as an example. So it says you can use event handlers for focus, blur, change, and select to process this data any way you want to or need to do so. All right. You can use an event handler for the click event of a regular button, not a submit. All right. So you can call all this stuff from a regular button, not necessarily from the submit button. All right. Then it says if you do go through and run through all of it, if you go run through all of it and it's valid, then you can call the submit method. All right. Do you have to do it that way? No. But it's something that's provided for you. All right. It says you can also use an event handler for the submit event of a form to validate data before it's sent to the server. Then if anything is invalid, remember this, the prevent default, that means that if anything fails and you call that, even if somebody clicks to submit, it won't submit it. All right. All right, and the chapter ends with, on the last 4 pages, a validation application that uses JavaScript. So the interface is shown right here. And they've got the HTML that goes along with it. All right. Now, I suggested when you took your last test that you grab the Packer Backer one that we did or some other one. I just didn't want it where people were spending a lot of that test time going and creating a form from scratch when we've already created some. That was my only rationale behind that. If you want to create one from scratch, then by all means do it. All right? So when you look on here, it says JavaScript validation, but when you look at the code that's in here, it is jQuery code. All right? So :radio.change. What does that mean? That means that you had one radio, but either nothing was selected and you clicked one, or one was selected and you clicked another one. All right? So what are we doing here? It says if it's corporate, then you're doing some disabling of stuff. Otherwise, so if it's corporate, you're doing some disabling. You're setting it to false. Otherwise, you're setting it to true. All right? But the point isn't that. The thing that's really important about this is just take a look through it. By and large, the things that you're going to that you will find on there, they will really and truly, they'll make sense. They're fairly intuitive. All right? That pretty much is it for the chapter. So if you would pull out your test reviews. So this morning I emailed you this. It says, good morning, as noted above, this is a take-home final. I'm going to give you a hard copy of it, but I did add something, so you've actually got more on the electronic one than you do on the other one. But this is it. Shouldn't be really any surprises. I told you that it very well could be redoing what you did originally and redoing it with jQuery. And that's pretty much what this is. When you come in here tomorrow, you're going to take the Chapter 8 written test. After everyone has taken it, I will hand back the test that you took last week, the hands-on test. Everyone in here will get yours back. Not my intention to come in here and read to you, so I'm not going to. All right? You can see what's on there. Again, I decided to try to give you as much time as I possibly could, that what I do would be to give you a take-home final. It is literally due Monday the 17th. But I want it by the beginning of class. No, I don't. Okay, we'll work on it that day. I don't want you to do that. I want you to have all that day Monday, all that day Tuesday, all that day Wednesday, and all that day Thursday to work on your portfolio. All right? Now, it says here you're going to create or recreate, which means fix up whatever you had wrong in the first website, and then create a new one where you're going to replace all the stuff you did with JavaScript with jQuery. I've got here some helpful websites. All right, and if you look up on the screen here just so you can see what they are, again, they are, if you decide that, with one of them I say to do an accordion, and it's not hard. It's literally a line of text that you add. Now, the bad thing about about a jQuery accordion is by default, one of them is always open. Is it possible for you to add your own code? I don't know. It says by default, accordions always keep one section open. All right. It says to allow for all sections to be collapsible, you can set the collapsible option to true. You can do that, or you can leave one open. Whichever way you think looks better is the way I want you to do it. All right. This is the jQuery plugin registry. I mentioned this to you in a different class period. It's got upwards of 2,000 different plugins. If you decide you want to use something that's in there, go ahead. This, as I mentioned before, is the jQuery data validation plugin. All right. There is a short video, I think it's about 15 minutes long, 12 minutes long,
This is now.
that goes over how that's used. So if you decide you want to use that. Finally, this is right from the jQuery.com page, but it's clicking the API documentation link. So if you want to use something with jQuery, how do you do that? I don't remember how to do that. Then you can go back here and walk. I am not requiring, just so you know, on this last test, you don't have to do any animation. I didn't know if this was a good website for animation or not. If you decide you want to do some animation, maybe John's doing his and he decides on his homepage he wants it to fade into view. That's fine. You don't have to do it though. All right. Also, the last chapter that's in this book, chapter that we go through, chapter 12, I think it is. I don't remember. But that chapter talks about working with Json and Ajax. You're not going to be required to do any of that either. You can try putting it in if you want to, but by no means do you have to. All right. So for the first website, fix any and all errors you had before. What I don't want is, and I apologize if I confused you with this, I want you to have for your first website, all right, the one that you're going to recreate or whatever we say on there. I want there to be a folder, call it something like Gym JavaScript, all right? And in there should be a JS folder that has all your JavaScript files, a CSS folder that has your CSS file probably in it, an IMG folder which has all your images, and then right underneath that folder itself, all your HTML. I don't want a main folder and an about folder. I don't want those. That's very confusing. Don't do that. Once you get done with that, I would start by copying that entire folder over to another folder and call it like Gym jQuery, and then work from there. All right? Now, bless you. When you're done, as it says, you will email me both folders zipped, and you'll also put both out on Bitbucket. I don't want to take any chances. I want you to do both of them. Is there anyone in this room that doesn't understand what I just said? Because we've had different problems with ranking going down, etc. All right, I know Chris sent me, talked to me the other day, and he mentioned how some of the stuff is changing on Bitbucket. Then we'll have to take a look at that. All right. This fixing up this first site is worth 75 out of the 250 points on this take-home test. That equates to 30%. So in other words, if you don't do it, you fail the test. Does that make sense? All right. And I want you to go back in, and anything that I mark up and I'm on your test, I want you to fix that. That's the best thing I can tell you about it. All right? All right. For both sites, don't just put text in there. Just grab a logo. There's so many of them out there. You can grab something. I don't think that's too hard. What some of you did was you put the logo on a line by itself, then you put the header down below it. Some people put the logo and the header, the nav bar, I should say, on the same line. Whatever way you want to do it is fine. All right? You do not have to have an aside. If you want to put in an aside, put it in. If you don't want to have an aside, don't. But you should have a header, which may or may not include the nav bar, or the nav bar underneath it, a main section, a section, and a footer section. Those should basically, other than the main and the section, the header, the nav bar, and the footer should be the same on all pages. Does that make sense? All right. So here's the rubric, because people ask, well, how are you scoring this? First one, it's based on the professionalism of the site. I mean, if for instance, if you made, and I didn't see any of you did this, but if somebody were to have made a gym that decided, this is a goth gym. It's going to be all black, and we're going to have almost black writing where you can, no, that wouldn't make much sense to me. All right, that's not professional. So the idea is, look at it this way. You've been contracted to create a site. for a gym. All right? So, the colors, the fonts you use, the image quality. All right? Some of yours, what some people did was they didn't change the sizes. Yours probably ended up looking better. If you don't like the images that were used, either on the original site or whatever, get rid of them and use your own. I don't want sites that don't apply. All right? And I don't want sites that are demeaning. You know what I'm saying? I don't want scantily clad men or women. Well, they're lifting a weight. And that's just not, this should be something that actually could go out on a website. All right? If you want, feel free to go in and use a Google font. All right? If for some reason you didn't use much color on the first one, don't overuse it, but feel free to use color. All right? Now, again, using one correct CSS file and writing solid, well-written HTML will be the most, that's basically that's the rubric or how I'm grading that part for both the rewritten site and the new site. All right? The JavaScript has to work. There's 5 pages. You use JavaScript 5 times. Each one of those is worth 10 points. I do not grade the way that Evan typically grades in a lot of his stuff. Now, he may have changed it. If he watches this tape, he may send me a nasty email saying, I don't do that anymore. He may or may not. I don't know. But the way he typically in the past has graded is it's either all correct or it's all wrong. So you screw up one thing. If there's 10 things and 9 are correct, you don't get 90%. You get nothing. I don't do that. I look at the thing in total. Now, that's good and it's bad. It's good in that you can get points. It's bad in that it becomes very subjective. It's what I'm looking for. All right? And I realize that's not that easy for you. Okay. So the first part, again, is worth 75 points. Then you go and turn it around and do the jQuery part of it. So notice where it was 10 points for the JavaScript. All right, why? Because it was 20 the first time. All right, so really they are being pretty much the same. So this is 30 points, and that's 150 of it, and then 5 points for your HTML and CSS on each page. If you add up 175 and 75, that equals 250. All right, and then finally, I changed these, not much, but it says these are the revised specs for both sites. The home page, again, should have a slideshow. So this is the slideshow in JavaScript. This is the slideshow in jQuery. You can add related text on the bottom if you think it's necessary, or not put it in there if you don't think it's necessary. If you use smaller slides for your slideshow, in other words, if your screen is this big and your slides are this big, you should put some text in there. Just having a slideshow that takes up 20% of your screen and nothing below it doesn't look good as far as I'm concerned. Second page, again, should be an about page. As we talked about before, it should have the image swap application. Pages 206 to 209 is how to do it in JavaScript. Pages 252 to 255 is a guide on how to do it in jQuery. All right? If you don't like the thumbnails and the images I gave you, get your own. That's fine. The third page should be an FAQ page. We talked about this before. I gave you the code that you're basically the questions and the answers that should be in there. All right? Now, what I'd like to do is, I'd like you to go and change it so that you use the accordion method for the jQuery part of this. It's actually easier than the JavaScript one is. And if you go out to that jQuery UI that I showed you, it shows you the code. The fourth page should be your working BMI page. Now, some of you, you emailed me or you said whatever, I don't have a working BMI. Yes, you do. That's the page you did for one of your earlier tests. What I don't want you to do is I don't want you to plug in something from the internet there. I want that to be your work. With the idea that if you go out and are looking for a job, be it in a few months from now or in a year and a half from now or whenever, that this is something you can show a prospective employer. All right? Finally, the last page should be the contact form. The stuff in here hasn't changed. I decided to change a little bit the values that were in there. All right? As long as you make it something like that, it's not that big a thing. All right? If you have questions while you're doing this, don't assume, just please ask. All right? So format all the fields, and I shouldn't have said format. If you please look on your screen, that should have said validate. Oh, that's the first mistake I found out here. But it should have said validate all fields using JS for JavaScript, jQuery, or the jQuery form validation plugin. So all of them should be validated as shown right here. Any questions on what I just handed out to you? So one more time, when you come in here tomorrow morning at 8:05, I will spend 5 minutes, as we usually do, going over that test review sheet that I gave you for Chapter 8. Then afterwards, we'll all take the written test for Chapter 8. Most of the time, everybody's done by 8:30. All right? Then at 8:30, I will go over Chapter 11. All right? And I'll probably also, right after that, go over like 8 and 9. We'll look at the homework. I'm not going to do every homework problem, but I'll grab 1 or 2 of them. All right? And we will go over them as a class. If you want to do them with me, then do them with me. You are still responsible for chapters 1 through 12, the extra exercises, and the short exercises. Are there any questions on that? Because we will finish all of the going over chapters 8 through 12, that means by the end of next week. So whatever that is, the 14th, I think it is, all right, that's when all of your chapters 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12 work for short exercises and extra will be due. If you have finished the homework for either 1 through 5, the JavaScript only stuff, and you haven't turned it in, turn it in. If you finish the stuff for 6 and 7, which was the DOM stuff, and you haven't turned it in, turn it in. All right? My goal is when you walk out of here on your last day, which is the 20th, the only thing that you will have left, that I'll have to grade, all right, is going to be your portfolio. Okay? And I didn't really update it, but I sent that portfolio to you also. All right? But again, I want to make sure you know how that portfolio is being graded. All right? Again, 150 points. You can use MobiRise. You can use a starter template if you want to. You can go out and look at a video on how to do one. You can do it yourself from scratch, whichever way you want to do it. At a minimum, that electronic portfolio should have 3 pages in it. Some kind of a home page, some kind of an about page. That about page, as it says, should link to your resume. I would recommend, because what a lot of people do is they take the resume and they put it out there as a Word document. More and more people today are not using Word, just so you know. All right? So, well, I can put it out there as a Google Doc. Yeah, you can do that too if you want to. I would recommend, if you're going to put a Word document out there, that's fine. But also put a copy of it maybe in PDF form. All right? And let somebody copy it from there. The About page should have something about you on it. It's about you. If you want to mention stuff about the program, you can, but you don't have to. All right? The Contact page, if you use MobiRise, you're somewhat restricted in what you can do. All right? But if you're not, if you're using Bootstrap, notice you can go out to Bootsnip and find contact pages. You don't have to start everything from scratch. But if you want to, you can. All right? So the rubrics are in here. It's got to be put out here. Chase, you should be able to get in now. I changed your password. Reset it, I should say. You should be able to get into iwt.rankin.edu. Christian and Tom, I need both of you to try to go into, you remember we use FileZilla? You try to get into the iwt.rankin.edu server. All right? If you say, I don't know what it is, okay, then let me know, and I'll work with you in just a second. All right. So if you look on here, and we take it from the top, 30 points for the home page, 30 points for the about page, 30 points for the contact page. That's 90. Having it work and putting it into a folder, all right, that's called portfolio. Okay, and putting all that stuff in there, moving it over and having it work on Rankin. You know, maybe I told you this before, maybe I didn't. Last year, people were using god-awful names, and they weren't telling me what they were. It was ridiculous. I had to log in as them to find out how they saved something. I don't want to do that. You know, and not to be funny, you want me in a good mood when I'm grading. It's not like, hey, let's see if we can piss him off because he's about to grade. That's not a real good idea. All right? All right. And then the final 45 points, it says, will be based on, did you follow the steps and how professional does it look? You do have to put a picture of yourself on there. I know with some people, I had people last semester, well, I don't want to. I don't give a damn. I want you to anyway. Because again, it's an electronic portfolio, and hopefully you're going to get a job interview based off of it. Okay? I would also suggest, you know, if you're putting a picture on there, if let's just say that Evan says, yeah, I got this really good picture of me and my mom. Cut your mom out of the picture. Just have it be you. All right? Get into whatever software or take another picture. All right? Any questions on anything we've gone over? I'm going to give you the rest of the period today to just try to catch up and look at what we've been doing. All right? Like I said, I guarantee you, I don't like to grade when you guys are in the classroom like this. I've got some of my stuff at home. By tonight, everything will be, all those tests that you took, the JavaScript Hot 3 last week, they will all be graded. All right? Questions on anything? All right, that's what I had.